He can't get to Georgia quick enough.
Yeah, so let's kick it over to this great interview with Nick Roush. All right, we're pleased to be joined by one of our favorites, Nick Roush, Kentucky Sports Radio. Huge game this weekend, Kentucky going down to Georgia. But before we get to that, Nick, I had to ask you real quick. You got to be feeling confident about this damn bourbon bet this year with Cousin Shane.
Oh man, but with all that laughter being laughed, I'm still like it's got to be how Florida fans feel right now when they face Kentucky, where it's just like you feel good, but they still might come in and kick your teeth in. I mean, that's kind of the way Kentucky's treated Florida lately, and that's how the Tennessee game is, where you can feel good about it going up to kickoff, but that logo, that team, there's always a bad feeling when those two get together. But yeah, Tennessee, it's almost like Joe Milton isn't the best person to ever throw a football, right? Like,
and I know you've been enjoying that.
I mean, if he was that good, then he would have been playing over Hendon Hooker. Like, it just, it reminded me of whenever Bobby Petrino said that Louisville's going to be even better on offense with Puma Pass at quarterback after Lamar Jackson left. It's like you can't. I mean, it's come on, like let's be smarter here. But Tennessee, they'll be all right. I do get the sense, Mike. I know you're covering all these teams that there is just. This year feels more chaotic because there isn't any team just really asserting its dominance. So even though Tennessee fell at Florida, which it's almost like it reminds me of Kentucky just not being able to win at Starkville. They can't win in Gainesville. They might not knock them too much by the end of the year because, I mean, I know obviously Alabama and Georgia are still on their schedule, but there is a lot of you got to play the games out. Missouri's showing us that right now. I mean, they might end up being a pretty darn good football team when it's all said and done. So a lot still to be determined in the race for the top of the SEC East. And Kentucky, man, they could shake things up this weekend if they do something crazy down in Athens.
Yeah, and before we get to that game real quick, I wanted to ask you about the Florida game because I know you picked Kentucky. Yep. Everybody over there at KSR picked Kentucky. Big surprise there. But I also picked Kentucky, but only by 1 point. I mean, I thought this was a coin toss game. They just kicked their ass. Did you anticipate that big of a whooping?
I really thought that it could get hairy in the second half. I thought it might be one of those things where if you get Florida playing from behind, you make Graham Mertz beat you. That's not the strength of their team. But I thought Kentucky was going to do it by throwing the ball. I didn't expect for Ray Davis to have 190 yards on his first 9 carries and Kentucky to be up 23-0 10 minutes ago in the half. Like it was an absolute butt whipping up front. And it's one of those things that we weren't used to the offensive line play last year. It took us all aback to see Kentucky's football to just struggle in the trenches. And I didn't know. I knew they would be better this year with the addition of Marcus Cox, and you brought in some other heavy hitters in the portal. You thought they were going to get better, but I didn't know they had that sort of running game performance in them, and I didn't know Ray Davis had it in him either. This was a guy that going into the year, we just saw him as this very kind of cut from the same mold as Benny Snell, where it's like he's going to be in between the tackles, not very explosive, but he's going to get good yards. He's been outstanding. He's like a shot out of a cannon when he gets the ball in his hands. His 8 plays of 30 yards or more are the tops in the SEC. He is explosive. He's got breakaway speed, and he's also doing it out of the pass catching game as well. So Ray Davis has turned out to be one of the best additions in the transfer portal in the SEC this fall. That was one of those where Cole Kublik kind of warned us. He said, listen, y'all aren't talking up Ray Davis enough. And he was right. I mean, it was clear that as soon as he got in the right system and got to play behind some competent offensive linemen, he could be a big weapon. And going into this Georgia game now, it's one of those where in years past, you just kind of had to – well, Kentucky's strength is running the game, but I don't think they can run against him. They showed last week that they can run against really anybody, even against the Georgia rush defense that hasn't been great this fall. So I'm not expecting another big 280-yard performance from Ray Davis, but I do think he can create some explosive plays that give the Cats a puncher shot down there in between the hedges.
Now, do you think that same formula, though, can work on the road against Georgia? And again, people get caught up and it's Georgia, number one. They're not number one. They have not been, and I've been screaming that all season long. And I'm just basing it on what I'm seeing. I'm not saying they're a bad team. They should be top 5, top 3 probably. They are very good. But this is not two-time national champion Georgia. Auburn just ran all over them. The caveat there, of course, they did it more with the quarterback run game.
Right.
That's not exactly Kentucky's. I mean, they're not going to ask Devin Leary with his injury history to do that. So what's your confidence level that Kentucky can do some of those things against Georgia? Or will this have to be the game where Devin Leary finally kind of has like a breakout performance if Kentucky's going to win?
You know, the part about this Kentucky team that has made my job difficult is that they seemingly find different ways to win every single week. And I see that as a sign of a good football team, a well-balanced football team that's going to make Kirby Smart's job difficult in this upcoming game. And I love when you see the offensive line coaches on Twitter that love to break down stuff inside and kind of explain it, where that 75-yard touchdown run that Ray Davis had, it wasn't your traditional zone. It wasn't your traditional duo. It was a little bit of both. And so I think the way that Liam Cohen is able to scheme up the run game is going to present opportunities. But you're exactly right. Like they can only eat so many no gains and 1 and 2 yard gains, hoping for explosives before they're going to have to throw over the top. And I think Devin Leary is due for a breakout game. I thought it was going to be last week. If you look back at Will Levis's first year under center with Liam Cohen, it wasn't until week 6 when he got rocking and rolling. He had his best performance, one of the best performances in his 2 seasons, lighting up LSU. I think he had a rushing touchdown and 3 passing touchdowns in the game. Absolutely torched them. They were firing all cylinders. Now, this Georgia team's a lot better than that LSU team. And the part that worries me is there are some injuries at wide receiver. The passing game struggles. They're as much on the receivers at this point as the quarterback. Leary, I think, has had to go through those growing pains, figuring out how to excel in a pro-style offense versus a spread. But a lot of it's on the receivers. Barrion Brown, we saw some of the drops last year, and you kind of had to take the good with the bad. But the shocking development has been Dane Key, where our guy Clark Brooks at SEC StatCat, 15 of the 19 drops that he's tracked have been with those two. And I think 9 have come from Key, who was a physical guy last year as a true freshman, who was sure-handed, and he made those contested catches. He had that 55-yard touchdown against Florida. He single-handedly carried that offense to a win at Missouri, making difficult contested catches. So right now, he's dealing with something between the ears, and he's just got to work his way through that. Going up against this Georgia pass defense, it's not the ideal time to hope that he can work his way through that Devin Leary can have his breakthrough. But it's certainly there, especially when I'm confident that Leary's going to have time to throw the football. And that's where you can kind of get the tight ends in the mix. You can hit your checkdowns with Ray Davis. It's really weird, Mike, looking at this Georgia defense that was so good up front for so long. They're 13th in the SEC in sacks. Right, like their pass defense is good, but it's because they've got great guys in coverage. So, and their linebackers are good at covering too. So you can't really rely on your tight ends to just sort of win mismatches in one-on-one situations. So this might be a situation where Leary, even though he's not a runner, he can extend plays with his legs, and he can pick up some 5 and 6 yards to make sure they aren't too far behind the chains.
And what's your confidence level that Brad White can scheme something up to where? Let's face it, you're not going to shut down Brock Bowers, but you just can't let him take over the game like he did against Auburn. What's your confidence level that the guy that many regard, that know what they're talking about, that Brad White's the best defensive coordinator in the SEC, that he can limit, at least make other guys beat you on that Georgia offense?
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I've seen some good defensive football over the years at Kentucky, and last week, in general, I've never felt more confident about a Kentucky defense because they're not reliant on 1 or 2 guys to do it all from them. It's got 14 sacks, and I think it's from 8 different players. They've got 9 turnovers, and Maxwell Harrison is the only guy that's got multiple, right? Whether they're recovering fumbles or picking off passes. This is a very well-balanced group that Brad White's preaching, like, guys, don't press. The big plays are going to come. And that's what's happened. so far this year. So I'm confident that they will force Carson Beck to be able to beat them through the air. And the thing about Brock Bowers, he is amazing. He's wonderful. He's going to be the best player that Kentucky plays all year. Do you know how many catches Brock Bowers had against Kentucky last year, Mike?
Mm-mm.
2 for 10 yards. So I know that Georgia didn't have to do a lot of that last year, but if Georgia's going to win, it's going to be a low-scoring game where they have to sort of force the issue defensively and give themselves short fields, because I really am unless Brock puts on his superhero cape, which he's perfectly capable of doing. I mean, they have guys who are big and physical enough that can play in coverage with him to an extent. I don't know what special things he's got cooked up for him, but I don't think it's an impossible task to say that Kentucky can bottle up this Georgia offense and make them, win a game where they can only score 17 points.
Mm-hmm. And really, Nick, people throw out all these stats, yards total, this, that. The only thing that matters is points and efficiency in scoring offense, scoring defense. And shout out Dave Bartu, CFB Matrix, for providing me this info. But do you have any idea, Nick, who leads the SEC in scoring offensive efficiency and is number 2 in scoring defensive efficiency, and it's not Georgia?
Is it Kentucky?
It's Kentucky. So there's one team that has a playoff profile or is closest to the playoff profile, and it's the Kentucky Wildcats. So that being said, what would surprise you more, a Georgia loss or a Kentucky win? I mean, I know it's the same damn thing, but what would be your personal reaction if they go into Athens and beat Georgia, who is an outstanding team? I get it, but they're not this Goliath that people are making them out to. They're beatable, and I realize the game's in Athens, so that makes it much more difficult. What would surprise you more?
I would be surprised if Georgia gave its best, if they put it together, because that's part of, they haven't had their breakthrough yet, just like Kentucky hasn't offensively. I'd be surprised if Georgia put it together and Kentucky was still able to come up with a win, just because it's so hard to. I mean, 0 number 1 teams have lost at home in the college football playoff era. It just doesn't happen because of that. You got the home team on your side, man. It's hard to lose. And if this game was at Kentucky, I would probably pick a Kentucky win. The way that Kentucky wins this game, though, there is a blueprint. They followed it last week, and it worked like a charm. They started fast. Kentucky's gone up 24-0 and 23-0 in both of their SEC games. They've gotten 3 and outs and forced turnovers in the opening 3 possessions of those games. Georgia is 17-17 on the scoreboard in first quarters this year. They've been bad. They've started slow, but then I want to say they're 156-28, outscoring their opponents in the second and third. So we're going to know a lot about which way this game's going just right after the first 15 minutes. If Kentucky can get stops and then create explosive plays offensively, this is all what really held Kentucky back the last 2 years in this game is their lack of explosiveness. They had the longest non-scoring drive of the year against Georgia last year. They went something 13 plays, 57 yards, and threw an interception right there at the goal line, right? And then 2 years ago, they had the ball for almost the entire fourth quarter, went 13 plays, and then got the backdoor cover with Wan'Dale Robinson. I know a lot of Georgia bettors were mad about it. I was very happy about it. Kentucky doesn't have to be methodical to score points in this year's offense. They have big-time playmakers offensively, and that's really, I think, what this game comes down to. It's obviously the turnover margin. I mean, the last time Georgia lost a night game, it was because they turned it over 4 times against Kentucky, and Randall Cobb got the job done back in 2009. If Georgia's turning the ball over, Kentucky can win this game. And if Kentucky's creating explosives and hitting Brock Bowers' cape somewhere, putting a little kryptonite on that football, they can win this football game. It's there for the taking.
So I'm not putting this out till Thursday. Nick, have you made a prediction for the game?
I haven't settled in on an official final score, but I do think what's ultimately going to happen is that Kentucky, when the field gets a little bit tight, they haven't been good in the red zone. They're 13th in the SEC in the red zone. They've left 4 chances up off the scoreboard this year. And I think what's going to happen, it's going to feel kind of like the 2017 game where Josh Allen got an early interception. They got it down to the 20, and they weren't able to capitalize on touchdowns. And I think Georgia's going to win a 17-13 football game where Kentucky kicks too many field goals, and that just doesn't get it done. But the one thing I'm fascinated to see is if they are able to get off this hot start. People forget in 2019 it was a 0-0 ball game at halftime, and then Chris Rodriguez, a Georgia native, dropped the touchdown to go 7-0 up in the third quarter. Georgia hasn't had a lot of pressure, particularly in these home games in the second half. I mean, it was you blinked your eye and they had the lead over South Carolina in the third quarter. If Kentucky can put some game pressure on them in the fourth quarter, how's Georgia going to respond? So I'm fascinated to see it. Love to see the Cats put some pressure on the Dogs and shock the world and do the impossible on Saturday night. But ultimately, I think Georgia's guns. They ain't the same old Georgia, but they're still Georgia.
All right, last question for you, Nick. Really appreciate your time. I know you're trying to get to the game. You told me you got some things behind the scenes, so hopefully you make it down there. Let's assume you do. Over under a dozen grown men bark at you as you walk into that stadium.
Oh gosh. See, here's the thing. In previous years, before the Joker Phillips era, it would only be like 6. They didn't even pay us no mind. It might even get up to 2 dozen. We're going to get barked at a ton because Georgia fans know that if there's a team that's going to give them hell, it's the Kentucky Wildcats. It's a physical football game. They're going to beat each other up in the trenches. And as good as Georgia is on that offensive line, Kentucky front seven, man, ain't nothing to mess with. Deion Walker, he's coming at you. He's coming at you, dogs. He's going to be barking right back.
All right, before you go, tell the audience, where can they follow all your work?
I'm at Roush KSR. That's where you'll find me on Twitter. On the Kentucky Sports Radio YouTube channel is loaded with content. We'll appreciate you going over there and give us a subscribe. If you want to know about the Cats, we got you covered here at KSR.
All right, it's great stuff. I mean,
yeah,
he's one of the best out there.
I love it. I'll never forget 2 years ago him like a heat-seeking missile trying to find you when you bashed Will Levis. That was my first impression of Nick. And I was like, after that, I was like, I like this guy. It's extremely passionate, always putting out great content. And if you're ever curious what's going on in Kentucky, man, I think I've never seen an outfit strangle every other media outlet at a location. It's like it's KSR and nothing. Right. I'm sure there's a few other Kentuckys out there, but it's like these guys are just so like in depth with their analysis and stuff. It's fantastic follows.
Yeah, and they don't take themselves too seriously.
No, they're fun. They're fun.
Right up my alley.
That's what I like about it. Because some of these, they get a little too uptight. Not the KSR boys.